Yeah. So we'll just call the meeting to order. First on the agenda, approval of the minutes from the December 12th, 2023 meeting. Anybody have a chance to look at those? They're in here. I guess we saw those earlier.
I'll make a motion that we accept those.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, so it's approved.
Quick,
All right.
was that Doty who seconded?
Yes.
Okay, want to make sure I got it right.
No, it was.
No.
Oh,
okay,
whoops, sorry. It's not Doty.
Okay,
It's Andrew.
so I guess the next section is our public comments section. We have some public comments. No
No,
public
not
comments.
tonight.
Some observers in the audience here.
That's with 7G.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, so moving on to the board briefing and business. So,
Okay.
Caroline?
So, update on 2 of the 2003 projects that are closing out, that are sort of in the final stages. One was the second phase of the Magnolia Psych Cemetery. Reviewed a final draft. They're still making a few edits, so I'm hoping I will get that final report back within a couple weeks. That was one where in the first stage they went out and they identified as many of the extant markers they could. In the second stage, they used ground penetrating radar to try to locate any unmarked graves, and then they also went back in and tried to match up. There were some records that showed photos of some of the markers that were about a decade or so old that they had not found when they went back in. So they were trying to go back in and say, okay, we have a photo that's like 10 years old. Can we still find that marker? Because we didn't find it when we went through the first time. And they were able to locate some additional ones. With the ground penetrating radar, they located 707 anomalies, which indicate possible unmarked graves on the site. So that was a lot. And we also discovered that the cemetery boundaries go beyond the cemetery boundaries on that northwest side. So if you look up there at that green map, you'll see there's like you have sort of a rough triangle, and on that upper left-hand side, you'll see like there's a secondary line that comes in that makes kind of a long, skinny wedge. Let's see if I put my marker on it. Can you see it? Can you see that right in here where I'm moving? You see that line right there? Well, this lower line was the original boundary of the cemetery, but you see this line up in here, that's where a lot of the graves were placed outside the original boundary. So just over time, that's just where they were buried. So we're waiting on the final on that. With the Dancy Garth Cemetery, they submitted a final draft, just minor corrections. That's going back in. That was one where they could not effectively use ground penetrating radar because so much of the site is overgrown, so you can't. It's really cool. It kind of looks like a baby buggy, but instead of a baby in it, there's like a piece of equipment. And they roll it over the ground, but if it's heavily forested, you can't, there's nowhere to roll it. And so they did a manual survey when they went out, and they sort of looked for impressions in the ground on what the archaeologists looked for, and they did identify 2 outside the boundaries that they believe they were in keeping with what they would expect for an unmarked grave, and that's what you sort of see down here. So that is interesting data to have. Once we get all of the information from Magnolia Sykes, the hope is that we're working with GIS, that we'll have a database where somebody can put in the name of a loved one that they believe is buried in the cemetery, and then the map will come up with a dot showing where that marker is, along with a photograph of the marker as well. Old State Bank.
Before we leave there, let me, do we know where we're at as far as the city adopting those 2 cemeteries?
To my knowledge, the city has not moved forward on it.
Is not moving forward?
Not
And
yet,
Do
so-
we know why?
No, that would be a question for council.
Okay. Because that's one of the, I don't want to sound like I'm aggravated, but I'm a little bit aggravated. You know, it was like 15 years ago that city council approved to adopt the Nancy Gar Cemetery. And nothing's been done in 15 years. And they keep talking about, you know, they got to find the ownership. We know who the owner of the cemetery is.
Talk to
Yeah, the whole 20 acres of the property there, and, you know, the cemetery is just a small part. That was up for sale not too long ago. So we know who the owner is. I'm just, you know. it's
So
been
do you
15
have-
years.
20 acres.
There was 20 acres there that was up for sale at one time. Now, Robert Garth, who's down in Pensacola, he was willing to donate, you know, the area for the cemetery there. But, again.
Do you have a copy of the minutes where council voted to
From 15
acquire?
years ago?
Can you get one? Because if you
Go
can
in
get
your
that,
file.
then that's a question at that point for
you.
legal.
I may, I don't know. I'll
Yeah.
have to look and see.
So, because that would be a question for legal.
It was.
But Billy Jackson brought that up in one of the city council meetings not too long ago about,
They
you know,
actually
didn't we vote
voted
on,
to do.
didn't we vote on that 15 years? Yeah, we voted, but nothing's been done. And what's kind of bad about the Gar Cemetery too is, you know, there's a history professor from Dalton, Georgia that's been coming over and working on the cemetery and cleaning it up. And what he's found is that kids are going into that cemetery, taking stones out of the cemetery and building fire pits out in the woods down there for them to party in and that sort of thing. So it really needs to be secured. And, you know, every time I ask where we're at, you know, and maybe I do need to ask city council, you know, where we're at on that. But the same way with the Sykes Cemetery, they say, you know, they're still looking for who's the owner. You know, I talked to Alice Sykes just the other day, who's the granddaughter of Solomon Sykes, who started that cemetery, and she knows where all the relatives are located at. So I just don't see anything. And when you ask somebody, say, well, we're still trying to figure out who's the owner. But as far as I know, we know who the owner is, and none of the people that own it have a problem with this. And they want us to go and take the thing over, so. But that's just my little, I'll get off my soapbox.
No,
now.
that's fine. That's fine.
It's,
And I was gonna say, normally we have legal here and we could ask them, but Ruth is not here today. Otherwise, I'd say
That's
you
fine.
could ask her. Old State Bank, the historic structures report is finished for the building, the engineering report. It is a lengthy document. I want to say it's like somewhere between 300 and 400 pages. It's massive with all of the research. It was really interesting. So they laser scanned the building, which is what's needed if you're going to start doing plans or putting out RFPs to have work done. They used infrared photography. So what you're seeing, one of those images is an infrared image in the lower screen. That's showing where moisture damage is accumulating. The balconies on the building are not original, and they created quite a bit of damage when they were attached to the building. And so it's allowing moisture to go in and penetrate the wall, and that's what is picked up in that picture, which is really interesting. The final report indicated, which is not surprising given the age of the building, that it is sort of at the point where it needs some attention, because it's a 200-year-old building, so it needs some upgrades. The roof and the basement both need to be addressed in terms of foundation and structure. If you have been in the bank recently, you'll know those huge stone steps have sort of shifted. Like if you were to drop your keys by mistake in the wrong place, you might lose your keys. That's because the foundation holding those has started to give way. So the stairs need to be reset with new foundation. And so those are, and then there's some challenges with the north wall. And of course, that's the wall that faces Wilson with all that constant traffic and vibration. And so, and it's based on the research, because we were able to find earlier historic structure reports and documents all the way back to the 40s. So part of what they did is they did a deep dive through every document on the building to see were there things that were showing up repeatedly through decades. That north wall has been a challenge for a long time. So there's some issue with it sort of trying to pull away in that corner from the building, and it's load bearing, so that is something that sort of needs to be addressed with some structure. So we do not have all the documents yet from the architects. We are looking to see what timeline and what cost. We sort of have this really large estimated budget, but until they start getting the engineers in and looking at every section, we don't have a firm budget yet, but it will be several million to address what needs to be done on the building. Part of it is just the age of the building. It's so unique and special that it's not like you can just hire a typical home improvement company to come in and fix it. And part of it is the magnitude to work on the stone steps. They're going to have to ensure that those columns stay attached, and almost like putting an exoskeleton to hold them up to make sure that they don't shift during the process. The columns are amazing. They're still plumb. They were absolutely thrilled with that because the flooring on the porch and particularly the stairs is showing a fair amount of movement. So they were really concerned that the columns may have shifted with it. So there was a lot of rejoicing when they discovered that the columns were intact. One of their recommendations is to put a retaining wall on the Wilson side street of the building to sort of help mitigate the challenges with that north wall and with some of the vibrations coming in off the trucks, because you can feel it when you're in the building. I mean, you can hear it and you can feel it as they go by. We do have received a past grant of about $480,000 from the state. So I have that, and I have applied for up to $1 million in federal funding. That application went in last month. One of the things in your packet that came into me today was a letter of support from the State Historic Preservation Office supporting our application in this particular grant. And then I'm also meeting with other governmental officials to start determining other routes of funding for the building as well. We, at this point, are thinking the earliest work would start would probably be fall, because we still don't have a full scope as we determine, you know, how does it get done in stages, what would the stages be, and how to break it into manageable pieces. When that occurs, the building will be fenced off and restricted at that time until the work is finished. We're very much looking forward to what this means for the building in terms of taking it for the next 200 years. It's, you know, think of it as sort of like a really intensive spa day to take the rough edges off some centuries of age, and what it means for the community in terms of what the community wants. So there had been lots of requests for weddings and events in there. It wasn't really set up for that. We're thinking that we're going to have some flexibility, since we're going to have to do a lot of work with systems to add in some support spaces and reconfigure some of it to really allow people to use it more, and both to use it as a museum but also to use it as a community gathering space. So we're pretty excited about that possibility.
We used to have wedding receptions in it.
Yeah.
Several things.
And that is one of the things, the floor loads cannot handle assemblies. So we'll need to strengthen the floors to get that in there so they can start handling receptions. So that was one of the things. We were walking through the space this morning, sort of laying out like, okay, where would, if you want, someone wants to get married here, where would the bridal room, you know, how can we give them space? What can we do to make this work? Because it's actually not that large of a building. I mean, it's like really big columns, sort of a small house inside. And so it's sort of working through that space, and if you have needs for storage, you have needs for staff, you have needs for public, you know, where does all of that fit within there? So that has been really exciting, and lots of things about, you know, what the original windows look like. I went up in the attic with them when the engineers were there for part of the time. So if you've ever seen photos that show the lancet arched window on the front of the building, the very old photos that show that, the window is in the attic in pieces, laying on the ground, which was kind of neat that it was still up there. So that was a fun find. We weren't sure what had happened to the window.
And maybe the building can't be all things to all people. I mean, like, I don't even have any suggestion about that, but every time we start talking about brides and bridesmaids and all this, it's a lot to do in that.
Well, and there's a lot, you know, the homecoming court gets photos taken inside, so people, but it's hard to do that if it is a museum space where you can't sit on things, you know, like that's, you know, how do you make that space usable so that it's not cordoned off behind a red velvet rope and that people can really, and most of the building, so the exterior, you know, it's been very heavily rehabilitated over the years. So like the original windows were 12/12 instead of 8/8, which is what's there now. The original doors were different. They know that the balcony is not original. The interior, there's almost nothing that is vintage on the interior. The vault the vault door. The outer door was added later. The vault floor is not original. It used to be dirt. It's concrete now. The wall configurations, the staircase is not original. Portions of that staircase came from a house that was a plantation house that was deconstructed in Mooresville. So that actually gives a fair amount of flexibility on how that interior is, because we had them in there looking, because I was like, okay, can you give me a list of, what are the original features, so that if we have to do structural work, we know where to be cautious. And after they went through it piece by piece, they were like, well, there's a little piece of wood over here. And that was about it, along with the bank vault, everything else. Because at one time, the second floor was like a public assembly dance hall space. So the rooms up there now are not what was there in the 50s and 60s. So it's just kind of neat, because this building kind of keeps reinventing itself, right? It's sort of like the chameleon building. It keeps changing to sort of support what the city is looking for. So that's, so we're looking forward to starting on that project, and the state has been very supportive about the work on it.
And you may have mentioned this, where's the funding coming for restoring
That's what I'm still looking for. So I have about $500,000 from the state from a PASS grant,
From
but
what department of the state?
PASS grant comes from the State Historic Preservation Office, but I've also put in for federal funding. That's the request that we're waiting to hear back on. And then once we see how much we get out of federal funding, then we'll start looking at what we think the budget will be and what the differential is between the two pots.
from the city then what's left will be approaching the city to go through the restore, is that right?
Potentially, or we could also go back to the state and see if there's other venues.
Like the tourism?
I have reached out to them. I have not been given anything that would be a lead yet. But I
Is
have
it just the
asked.
city and state, not the
In-
county?
I'm sorry, can I finish? Let me finish addressing Trudy, and then I'll ask you a question. I have reached out to tourism and asked if they had any grants that they thought would be supportive of this, and they have not located any that they thought this would be a strong application for. So,
Tourism indicator or
tourism
in
indicator
Montgomery?
to reach out to Montgomery, because they are the liaison for Montgomery. Yeah. So, because part of it also is the magnitude of grant. So we're looking for one substantial enough to make progress on the building. So for example, like I found a grant that I was looking at the other day, but it was like, a $5,000 grant. And I'm like, okay, that's not gonna be, the amount of paperwork for that is the same as the $500,000 grant that I received. So we're looking for the larger grants that will really start to take
Well,
portions
plus
of
most of
this.
those, you have to have the work completed by a certain.
Well, that's the other thing. A lot of them have very short timelines for work being completed. Yeah,
So if you're gonna have to stack grants, you need some that you can roll over.
Yeah.
Some kind of-
yeah. The PASS grant, I've got a little time on it. The federal one, I think, if I remember correctly, it was like about a 2-year. And it might even be that we have to stage it in pieces to be able to do a chunk and then line up the next section of funding too. So that's what I'm reaching out to, sort of asking them what the options are.
From the tourism out of Montgomery can get more than $5,000 or 10 or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, so.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, you have records showing how many tourists from all parts of this country come into that building. I'm sure, don't we?
They have a few thousand each year that come through, yeah.
And every time I see in the past, a bus, a tourism, or what am I trying to say, boat, can you think about it? Right? They're all gonna go to the state bank, and now they go to the train depot and come see you, but it's gotta be at least, but anyhow, I have some other thoughts about it.
Yeah, if you've got funding ideas, I
Well,
am
I mean,
all
I
ears.
just
Yeah.
think that that the tourism is one we shouldn't let go by the wayside.
Well, I haven't. I mean, they are looking for me. I have asked, so they are looking to see if there's one that it fits with. Absolutely. I had a meeting with them last week when we sat down and talked about it, and we went through it. So,
I know it's near and dear to Lisa and Tell's heart, so,
yeah.
it used to be anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Phil, you had a question?
The county too, you talked about city and state, is county, is that an interest that they would pitch in money also for?
John, I don't know. I mean, I know with the farmer's market, I think they were able to get a little bit out of them. I would assume the county would probably refer back to tourism, the local tourist office, which they help fund.
Sometimes, you know, sometimes when it's framed correctly, if you know.
Yeah. So if you know.
That's fine, I was just
Yeah,
curious.
no,
Yeah.
it's worth a shot, I would say.
Yeah, then we definitely, yeah, once I get some numbers from the architects and I've got more numbers to work with, because we're waiting to get, they've been running some numbers with the engineering firm trying to figure out how they can start piecing it, if it's gonna be done in stages, and what the first stage would be and what that would encompass, and then get some numbers. So,
Here's an odd question.
mhm.
I hate to even bring it up, but the artwork that was in the annex, there were 6 panels.
They're in my
The-
basement.
They're in your basement?
Yeah.
Do we have any
It's
plans?
supposed to be temporary, but I don't think it's temporary.
John and I found those, was it here in the basement of the city hall? That they had been stored for years and years that were in the annex. There was a well-known artist down in Birmingham that did those back in the 1940s. And I just don't know if there's any plans for, with the Old State Bank as far as that work for the, were you aware of the paintings?
I'm aware of them, I know that they're not in good condition, if I'm correct on that, John,
Yeah,
that they have.
The
had-
cost to do what needed to be done to really restore them was astronomical. There had been some thought about doing a good photographic, you know, big files to really get a big, you know, a good photographic scan of the whole thing. And then do with that what you may, you know, they could scale it down and put it in, you know, digitally display it or whatever, but the actual, what it would take, I don't have the numbers at my command right now, but I spoke to David about it and a couple other people, and it was, no one's gonna do that.
Yeah, a full restoration would probably
Yeah.
be. But there's other options, I would think, and rather than a full restoration, just a mounting of what we've got left, you know, nothing else.
What are they paintings of?
The original founders of the bank, some of the slaves that built the bank.
It's a pretty cool thing.
There's 6
Civil-
panels. I can't
There's
remember
a
what
Civil
all.
War type panel as well.
Yeah.
And it's, quite frankly, it'd probably be problematic, with some of the subject matter, you know, there's a Confederate flag on it, there are slaves on it. And I think probably that was the reason why it ended up going into storage in the first place.
Well, they
There is a
took down
history.
that- They took down that whole annex,
yeah, when the
That was
annex
on the
came down,
side.
it came
Yeah.
down as well.
so they
So,
didn't really know what to do. with
There,
it.
I just bring it up because it's another concern, you know, is that when you're talking about putting this much money into something. But yeah, I agree with you, it should be documented properly, you know, so.
So it's in your basement, but it's just down there.
Yeah,
kind of
they're
like
in big
storage
rolls,
spot.
it's properly mothballed to the extent it can be, you know.
Sure.
Some
He's
conservators.
got his own little art museum down there.
Yeah, some conservators did it, you know, so it's
Oh,
done the right way, you know, but it's not preserved, it's just,
well, I'm just glad to know it's
Carefully.
at your place.
yeah.
Aren't you?
Yeah.
John's got the ultimate building filled with hidey holes that he
Yeah.
has.
They're
It's like a
filling
really
up.
big Easter egg hunt
Yeah.
down there sometimes. So once I get more updates on this, I had asked for a timeline on the federal funding, but they have been unable to give me one in terms of when I could expect to hear, because that's what I'm waiting for to really give me a sense of what would be the next step after that. The underrepresented community grants, which we've started on, that is the grant we received from the National Park Service. Urbanist Media is working on that. They are really there to update stories for our existing National Register districts and to locate any new stories with the extant built environment that they can. So they have been out once. That lower right image shows them at First Missionary Baptist doing some oral interviews. And they're really trying to locate stories on African American men and women that just haven't been told yet in relationship to these places. And then also women in general, because we have National Register nominations, but Carolyn Courtner Smith is just barely mentioned. There's very little on her. There's, Ruby Nash, who practically ran Coca-Cola for decades. She does not
Did
show
run
up.
Coca-Cola.
Huh?
Did run
Yeah.
Coca-Cola.
She doesn't show up in the nomination, even though her house and the house that she had built for her daughter are in the district. So those are sort of errors of omission that they're looking to have that data to correct. So they should be back in, I believe, in April to continuing doing. And part of this project is they're going to have 2 podcasts. One will most likely be on First Missionary Baptist, because there's such a strong story with that church. And the other, we're looking at Delano Park, specifically Fort Decatur and Carolyn Courtner Smith, and sort of the Girl Scouts, because we've got multiple leads with females and that site and what that would look like. So we're very excited about that.
Is that the end game for this, just a couple podcasts? Is that what
No,
the goal
it is to
or what?
update existing National Register nominations or create new ones. So there has to be one document that comes out of this for them, and it will most likely be a new National Register nomination for Old State Bank, because it is it's extraordinarily old National Register nomination, and it's really lacking in terms of its depth. So that is the one that we are looking at updating. And then I think next year, and that will fit within the timeline of the grant, because part of it is you have a very, start and an end. But in terms of future projects, we're getting ready to update. We're hoping next year Albany Commercial, that district will have boundary adjustments and be updated. So they're expecting to add some of that data into that nomination. And then we need to update Old Decatur's, which I think is the oldest of the extant nominations, 1980. That's the year the Sony Walkman came out, I think. So that one needs updating, but that would probably be beyond the boundaries of the grant. It's just, that will get the project started. We'll do a 1 nomination, which is part of the requirement, and then we'll continue moving forward as we get more data. And we might even need to do additional studies. We're sort of waiting to hear what they find, or there are things of interest that they can't go but so deep into that we need to circle back on. So we're sort of excited with that. Lots of data. We have 2 CLG grants for 2023. These are federal grants that are passed through the state. Both of these have just started. One is for Delano Park. It is a historic structures report and master plan for Delano Park. So they will be looking at the extant buildings and structures. So that includes the Girl Scout house, the wall around the Rose Garden, the bathhouse, and then of course Fort Decatur. They'll be doing some imagining exercises with Fort Decatur to think about what that space could be used for. What are options? Could it have an addition? How could it serve the city? And then also just looking at conditions, and then of course the master plan for Delano. So for the next 2 decades, what are the goals for that park?
Remind me when we get to that point. I don't know if I've ever told you that we have some pretty cool photographs of USO dances with the 341st Engineers and all the, World War II era events in the old armory.
So I have got the Dropbox loaded. I had sent out that email with you and LAS maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
If you want to, and I've already started dropping my things in.
Yeah.
Barbara Kelly has given me so much information, it's getting mailed on a flash drive because it will not fit in the Dropbox. But if you've got photos to start putting in there for them, please do. I think, let's see my calendar. They will be here, their first run, next Wednesday. That's their sort of initial run to look at the site, to bring in people and start determining the next steps. So we are very excited about that project. The other CLG project this year is a survey of Austinville. So one of the things that is requested of certified local governments is that they survey the built environment to look for neighborhoods or buildings that are potentially eligible for the National Register. So we have some existing districts, but there are whole areas of this city that have not been reviewed. That, for example, is how we ended up with Simpson's Florist. It was kind of sitting in plain sight, but there had never been anyone brought out to start looking in that area. Austinville is a site that had been identified. Occasionally I get questions on tax credit projects, but if you don't have a National Register district, it's almost, or an individual building, it's almost impossible to get that in time to get a tax credit moving. You need that foundation first. So John helped me. I was in archives one day. He showed me sort of an early image of Austinville map from the 1950s. I took that to our GIS team. I had them overlay it on a contemporary map of the area, and everything within red is a pretty strong lineup with the bulk of this map here.
Can I change the angle on this? Do you mind if I open it up
Lamar,
real quick?
can that
Is that okay?
be moved?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So sorry, now I've ruined the live stream.
That's okay. Oh my God, look at that.
How was that?
Wow. Can you guys still see down there? Trudy, can you see?
That's wonderful.
Aces, baby.
Thank you.
I was like,
I
I
was
can't
like,
see nothing, guys.
Ah, good deal.
Okay.
Hi, Mom.
Taking care of
I just want to enjoy the
No,
graphics. I can't see it at all.
thank you, much better.
Is that better? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay, go
So-
ahead. Hit it.
So you can kind of see the red is the outline showing the survey area. So when I sat down with GIS, the survey requires that you look at buildings that are 45 to 50 years old or older. So you know, anything built in the 80s, we're not there yet. So if it's 80s or more contemporary. And so when I had GIS, I had them color code it, and I'm like, okay, I need anything that's too new to be in the survey to be color coded so we can look at how we need to draw boundaries. And so that's why you see this sort of odd right here where it dips up, because everything in here, if I remember correctly, is from the 90s. And I was like, okay, we're not going to survey something from the 90s. So that's why we sort of worked around this area.
I don't mean to be an idiot, but what is that little amoeba shape in the middle? This one right here. What structure is this?
Oh, it's a subdevelopment.
It's a what?
It's a subdevelopment.
Okay.
So,
It's like a subdivision?
yeah,
Okay.
it's like a subdivision.
Thank you.
So that's why it's because it's too new. It's a
Okay.
newer one, yeah. And you can really tell as you go down the belt line down here, you see all of this pink, which makes sense because if you drive down the belt line, most of the buildings you're seeing are fairly contemporary. And so it's really back up in here because we were sort of looking for the closest overlay to the size of Austinville when it was incorporated into the city to sort of show us sort of the older buildings. And so the firm that is working on this is Impact 7G. They have 2 of their consultants here tonight, so I'm going to let them talk to you a little bit more about the process and what it's like on their end. We have Christina and Casey. Hello, ladies, and we'll have you come up to the mic.
Oh, is it time to,
No.
Hello, I'm Christina Poston, and this is Casey Radke, and we're with Impact 7G. My background, I've been in historic preservation and archaeology for the past 10 years or so, working throughout the Southeast doing these types of surveys, and Casey's been doing about the same thing for about 8 years. So we're pretty well familiar with the process at this point. If you want to go ahead and hand out the little handout. So pretty much what our process is just to walk around within the defined boundary and take photographs of anything, well, everything from the public right-of-way so that later we can assess the houses for integrity, continuity, and kind of assess what development phases may have occurred throughout the district or the potential district, or even evaluate even smaller subsets of districts. So after we photograph, which is what we're doing this week, we'll start to develop the inventory of houses, how many buildings are in the area, as well as filling out the survey forms themselves that will be turned into the Alabama Commission. And then once all of that is done, then we'll start working on the report itself and hopefully wrapping up everything. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. If there's any particular questions, I'm happy to answer.
I'm interested, you know, as far as the historic integrity of the
Mhm.
structures goes. I know that's a challenge sometimes. I mean, what's the, you know, it's been monkeyed with to this degree, but it's still okay. Is that a subjective thing? Is there any kind of a scientific formula that's used to?
So the typical standard is how much original material is left.
Right.
So if you look at a building as 100% from the date it was built, and then how many different things were taken away or added on, then that percentage gets less and less. So if the windows have been changed out from wood windows to vinyl windows, if the wood siding has been changed, the wood siding has been changed to vinyl siding, there's any major large additions, all of that's going to kind of decrease that percentage. And that's kind of what we base our integrity off of.
Does reversibility enter into it at any degree? Or?
Yes. For instance, like you can put vinyl siding over original wood siding. So if that's discernible from the public right of way,
Okay.
that's something we definitely consider.
I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of those houses have been.
No
Rentals
inside
especially.
concerns, just all outside, visible from the outside.
Right. This type of survey only works from the outside.
And so I'm guessing like in our existing districts, we have conforming and non-conforming, is that the right terminology? So is that what we'll wind up
Right,
with
that-
from y'all?
that's-
You'll have, each of the structures will be either conforming or non-conforming?
Correct, yes.
When you get done? Okay.
That's exciting. How's it
Yeah.
looking? Are you feeling like you have a lot of buildings that may be conforming?
It's definitely a mixed bag. There's definitely some great older homes out in the area that probably date very early to the development of Austinville. And then also some like nice, interesting developments that occurred probably once it was annexed in the 50s or 60s that might be interesting as well. So yeah, we were out today, got a good bit of it done. So yeah, we definitely got a feel for it today. So there's some good stuff out there.
Would you say the school and the churches are the most historical buildings there, or what would you say is
Yeah,
stands out?
the school, the original high school, which is now the elementary school, is definitely in consideration. I think we identified 2 of the churches, the cemetery, one of the historic stores is still standing, and we found a little brick building which someone we talked to in the neighborhood actually said was the original jail. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, the jail is pretty, it's more like a hoosegow. You know, but yeah.
More like a what?
A hoosegow, you never heard that term?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
He
In
hasn't
fact-
been in one.
Yeah. And in fact, in
I wasn't raised in
some of the
Alabama.
early, I think it's even on one of the Sanborn maps for Decatur or some other maps. Decatur, Albany had a hoosegow. It's just basically, this is where you put the drum, you know, to dry out, you know, the disruptive person, or, you know, and so it's not much more than a room.
But the moral of this is do not play Scrabble with John.
Yeah. But we have the key at the archive. Somebody gave us the key to the hoosegow. They found it or something, so.
Caroline, is the Cupcake Bank in this district?
No.
It's not on that. I mean, we have 2 round banks, 2 temple banks here, but it's not. I'm so bad with maps, so it's like.
So what kind of reaction are y'all getting from the neighbors? excited.
We had about 4 or 5 people stop us today, and they were all very interested.
Good.
Definitely very positive feedback.
Hey,
Just one that was, she
yes,
kindly
she's-
asked I do not take
Yeah.
photos of her house.
that's
And I was
right.
like,
My sister is an art teacher who rotates among several of the elementary schools. And when she was at Austinville a few years ago, they had a history club. And the kids just loved it. And I would go and talk to them about, the thing that was so neat to me was, you know, it has this unique history that goes from, you know, and even though the demographics of the area have changed, you're a part of the history too now, and the kids really, they ate it up, they loved it. So I think you'll get some buy-in from some people eventually with this project.
yeah, I mean, I would say we had a handful of like woohoos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Yeah.
That's great.
And we're looking, one of their colleagues will be out here next month, and we're looking at maybe doing a public meeting over in Austinville if we can secure a space that would sort of work for that, to introduce people to this project a little bit more and sort of see. One of the things we'll have when they're finished with this, you know, you have this initial map here that's color-coded, you know, pink and yellow, but they'll come up with a map where everything that could be potentially contributing is one color, and then you start looking for where the clusters are. You know, do you have a big concentration? So it might be, yes, there actually could be a National Register district, but it might not be this whole area, it could be just a portion of it, and where they normally like to see about 60% contributing typically. So, you know, is there a space on that map where we get that concentration that still, you can really walk through that history and see it?
Yeah.
So that'll be one of the findings that we get at the end of this project.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, next up, we have the discussion and the vote on the 2024 Preservation Awards. We don't want people to find out that they're getting an award before the award is given. So all the information will be in the minutes, but we're not going to be broadcasting this part. So Lamar, if you want to take us offline so we can start looking at all the wonderful projects for the year. And
Yes, ma'am, stand by.
an award.